The point was to record a bunch of intro video playing guitar, then start talking about it technical stuff, but I never hit record on over here. So all that playing I just did didn't get recorded. Oh well. What's going on? My name is Dylan. This is Dylan Talks Tone. Yeah, the video didn't start how I wanted it to, but we're going to start it now. So we're going to talk about how to play into an amp with no pedals, nothing, and get the sounds we want. So what I mean by that is my favorite way to play guitar. I'm kind of playing like a punk sort of band, and I like to play with no pedals. I like to just play a little bit lower wattage amp. This is 20 watt Marshall. I've got my Gibson SG Junior with a Dylan P90 in it. I'm using my Runway Audio cable going straight into the amp. And I can accomplish some things. I can basically play whatever I want, driven sound, like kind of breaking up sound. Then I can turn the volume down a little bit. It cleans up a little bit. Can turn the tone down a little bit. The tone changes. Can turn everything back up to 10 and go wide open again. That doesn't just happen. There has to be a few things in play for that to work. You've probably played many guitars where you try what we're about to do and the volume turns down and it gets lower, but it doesn't really change. Like, it just gets quieter, but the tone of the guitar doesn't change. How it hits the amp doesn't change. So it's just still an overdriven tone, but it's just quieter. Sometimes when you turn the volume down, it like shuts off like a switch because of pot taper. So we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about pot taper, about how the pickup is supposed to work, like what it actually does and how it affects what's going into the amp. We're going to talk about amp settings, and we're going to set it all up. But first, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. This time, I'm going to hit record over here. So the whole idea of this is to be able to play with no pedals and just use the 2 knobs or 4 knobs, depending on your guitar, or 3 knobs, to control how the guitar interacts with the amp, so that you have everything you need when you play whatever you want to play. And I know that this is not for everybody. Some people want more stuff. Obviously, it sounds super dry right now because I don't have any reverb. I would really like to have some. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going straight in with nothing else. Even if I was playing this way, I would probably still play with some reverb. I don't know, unless we're in a big room or something. Okay, I'm actually shooting this the next morning. I did the plan stuff yesterday. Started raining, got really windy. And, and I watched a bunch of looked at a bunch of YouTube comments last night. So for everybody who hates my ridiculous watch, I'll give you another close-up of it. This is, here, let's get it focused. There you go. This is a Casio G-Shock. So it's not really ridiculous. It's just clear. And if you think that's ridiculous, I'm a watch freak. I've got tons of watches. So if you want to know more about crazy watches, this is not the craziest one ever. Playing on the edge of breakup with no pedals and having an overdriven sound and then playing clean like I was doing with my SG Junior into my 20-watt Marshall. Let's chat about how we do that. The first thing we need to understand is that we're not using vibration to make sound here. We're using electricity. And I think a lot of people either don't want to admit that or don't understand it, but with an electric guitar, you're using electricity to make sound. The pickup picks up the vibration of the string and creates a voltage. We don't need to get into the particulars of how a pickup works. The bottom line is it's creating a voltage. It's a little baby voltage. It's like 300 millivolts, 400 or 500 millivolts, depending on the pickup. And it takes that little baby voltage, right? And it sends it to the amplifier. Now, most amplifiers have actually two amplifiers in them. They have what we hear of as the preamp and the power amp. In some amps, there will be just one volume that turns it all the way up. Some amps, there will be two. There will actually be a preamp volume and a power amp volume. My Marshall actually has that. So there's actually one knob that controls more or less the preamp, and the other knob more or less controls the power amp. Now they cross over, and EQ crosses over, and there's all kinds of versions of that. But for the simplicity of this conversation, we're going to take the little baby voltage that comes from the guitar. We're going to send it to the preamp, and we're going to make it a little bit bigger, okay? And then that little bit bigger voltage is going to be sent to the power amp, and it's going to be made this big. Now, every amplifier has a threshold of how much bigger it can make that sound before it can't make it bigger anymore without screwing it up. That's the way to say we get clean sound, clean sound, clean sound, and then we hit the limit of the capability of that amplifier before it starts screwing up the signal. Once it hits that, we have overdriven tone. That's what it is. It's literally the guitar signals going through. It's really good, and then all of a sudden we reach overdrive. We do more than the amp is capable of doing, and it screws it all up. It makes it sound crunchy. The trick to what we're doing in there, where I could actually play an overdriven kind of sound, turn the volume down, turn the volume back up, and have it go clean, and then have it go dirty again. The trick to that is to set the amplifier, the two amplifiers, the preamp and the power amp, to where the signal comes in clean, it gets amplified, right? You could overdrive it with the preamp. That would give you a really more fuzzy sort of sound. You could turn the preamp way up, and it would go beyond what it can do, and it gives you more of a fuzzy kind of sound. Or you could use the power amp to do that. That's how I do it. So I leave my preamp. So basically, the little baby voltage comes in. It kind of passes through the preamp. It gets a little bit bigger, but I don't push that beyond its limits. Then it goes to the power amp, and then it gets pushed just a little bit beyond the limits of that power amp. And that's what you hear is that crunchy sound. But not too much. Not too much. Because then what I do is I take the volume on my guitar and I lower it down to stay back within the limits of that power amp, and now we're clean again. Now, if those two things are too drastic from each other, it will be difficult to do. If your pickup is not good enough, it will be difficult to do. If the taper on your pots is not good enough, it will also be difficult to do. Why are some pickups better at it than others? Well, first of all, if you have a pickup that makes tons of voltage, and it makes it no matter whether you strum hard or soft, the dynamics isn't really there. It just makes a voltage. The pickup is on, right? It will be more difficult to vary that, to be able to keep it right on the edge of breaking up and then bringing it down with the volume knob and then bringing it back up and then bringing it down. If the pickup is more capable of those dynamics, where when you pick softly, because when you pick softly, you're making less voltage. When you turn the volume knob down, less voltage. And you're going to say, well, that has more to do with the taper of the pots. It has something to do with it, the taper of the pots, for sure, because if the pot taper isn't good, then it can just be a switch. Like literally, like you'll be on 10 and you turn it down a little bit and it just goes away. future me jumping into this video while I was editing it, I want to add one thing here, is that the frequency response of the amp versus, like how it tilts more or less, Fender versus Marshall versus AC, whatever, and how that interacts with particular types of pickups and the frequency response of those pickups also plays into this, but that is a completely whole other kind of subject of this. But I just wanted to mention that was another point that I didn't want to forget. And you have a good pickup when you turn the volume down and you can hear it clean up as that voltage comes down. You can hear the frequencies change a little bit as that voltage comes down. It's a reason why a lot of people like to use a volume mod. I don't, but that's why. A not as good pickup, when you turn the volume down, it's going to stay basically just as distorted and just as overdriven, but it's just quieter. So a good example of that, if you go back and you listen to the Gibson pickup that was in my SG Junior, it did that, where you literally turned the volume down and it sounded exactly the same, just quieter. I don't like that. I want to actually clean it up. That's pickup dynamics. That's not pot taper. And somebody are going to get in the comments and say, yes, it is. Yeah, okay, so it's a interaction between the two, but it takes the two things together, good pot taper and good pickup dynamics, for this to really, really work. So then the next question is going to be, how do you set your amp for all of this to work? Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to do it, and you are going to do it different than how I'm going to do it, because how hot your pickup is, how hard you play, how soft you play is going to matter in all of this, right? And only you control that. Your amp is obviously different too. The amount of headroom your amp has, the amount of limit that your amp has before it starts to break up also matters. So here's how I do it. I turn my knobs all the way to 10 on my guitar. I go over to my power amp, which is the master volume on my Marshall, and I set it at about, 10 o'clock or so. I take my preamp, which is the smaller of the two amps, and I turn it up until it is dirty. Then I turn it back until it is clean. So we have 100% clean. But it's in stages, right? So the preamp is not sending dirty signal to the power amp. I want clean signal from the preamp being sent to the power amp. So adjust my preamp volume so that it's clean, knowing that this volume is not very loud, so it's never going to be dirty right now. Then what I do is I go to my master volume and I turn it up until it starts to break up. Haven't touched any knobs on the guitar yet. Then I turn it up just a little more, so that it's got that nice broken up edge of breakup sound where, with a good pickup and good pot taper, well, with a good pickup anyway, when all the knobs are on 10 on the guitar, the harder you play, like the more broke up it sounds, and the lighter you play, like it's not as broken up, it's a little cleaner, you can like force it, and it sounds really good. That's where I like it to be. Then what I do is I turn my volume down on my guitar till about 6 or 7, and I say, okay, is the volume dropping too much, or can I actually play with it like this? Usually, with a good pickup and a good pot taper, 6 or 7, the guitar cleans up quite a bit. Okay, then I turn it back up to 10, and it crunches again. Turn it back down to 6 or 7, and it's nice and clean. And I actually like how the highs go away a little bit. It gives me a little bit different tone, especially with a single pickup guitar. Then you can start playing with the tone knob, and you get a bunch of different sounds with no pedals at all. You probably also heard that it wasn't totally clean when I was doing that. Yeah, you're going to be like, well, that wasn't actually that clean. It was a little dirty. Yes, you are right. A, because that's the way I like it. And B, I like it a little dirty. And B, because the wattage of your amp affects that. A 20 watt amp, a 10 watt amp, a 5 watt amp, like a Champ or a Princeton or a Blues Junior or my 20 watt Marshall is never really going to be clean at playing volumes, because you're always going to be pushing that amp a little bit to the edge of what it can do. And that's why if you want to play with super high volumes, clean, you need more watts. get it on the very edge of that limit, crunch that signal a little bit, turn it down with the volume knob, clean up, don't need no pedals at all. I think everybody should try it. Even if it's not reasonable to play like that all the time, it's probably a good thing to learn. I know it was super technical and weird and boring and stuff. Some of these videos get that way. I know there's going to be people in the comments, you explained that wrong and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I'm just showing you how I set it up. And that's how I love to play. I really love to play that way. It's my favorite thing. Obviously, being in a motorhome or being in a small room or being in a wherever, you know, it can be a little bit more difficult to do that because it's too loud. But live video on Thursday. We made a bunch of revisions to Patreon and to the YouTube members to give you more value and more stuff. So make sure you check out the join button. We added a bunch of stuff because I want you to know that we appreciate you, and I wanted you to know that there's a bunch of stuff down there that I think you'll dig, as well as over on Patreon. They're basically the same. I kind of mirrored them so it wouldn't be confusing. So if you didn't want to mess with Patreon, you could just hit the little button down there. But some live stuff, some live interactive stuff, I think you're going to dig it. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you in the next video.